we likely will have a few more joining via Zoom.
Right. We'll get started then.
Yeah.
So good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tavio Archimasco. I'm the Associate Director of the CTSI here in Milwaukee. And I'm the Director of the Implementation Science for Innovation and Discovery Educational Series. We are very pleased today to have a speaker from MCW, Dr. Muska Nataliansia, MD, PhD, MPH. He's an assistant professor with dual appointments in surgical oncology and in the CAPS. He's also part of the MCW Laban Pancreatic Cancer Program. Dr. Muska's research focuses on cancer disparities, particularly in pancreatic cancer. And he's been using implementation science frameworks and strategies to develop different interventions that improve healthcare delivery. He has a background in health services research and health policy, and he aims to contribute to efforts addressing disparities in cancer care. And going forward, he continues to explore more community-focused work and foster collaborations with other colleagues to increase or to enhance healthcare delivery. He's been trained in implementation science, and he is the new director of our Implementation Science 101 course as part of our Masters in Clinical and Translational Science. And he is a part of our inaugural group of dissemination and implementation consultative team here at the CTSI. So welcome, Muska.
Thank you, Dr. Octavian, for the kind introduction. So thank you for the opportunity today to share a bit about our work in implementation science, specifically.
I'm just gonna see if I can switch the camera view here.
Yeah, so we can share.
Yeah, now it's on the podium. I think that's better.
Okay, cool.
Perfect. Awesome.
So yeah, thanks again for the opportunity today to share a bit about our work. And for today, we're going to specifically talk about the role of champions in implementation and how they drive progress for intervention in our setting. So I would like to start with a bit of introduction to this event in MCW Laban Pancreatic Cancer Program that we have. And I think it will tie in nicely to the topic of today. And when we talk about translating research into real world impact, we often focus on interventions like clinical trials, new treatments, and best practices. But the truth is, we know that none of this will succeed without the right people to drive the changes. And implementation science, part of it recognize that beyond the frameworks and strategies, we need individuals or champions who bring these interventions or evidence-based practice to life by bridging science and practice. And champions can come in many forms: clinicians, researchers, community leaders, or even patients. And they take on the critical work of advocacy, education, and mobilization to ensure that the ABP or evidence-based practice don't stay on paper, but reach the people who need them the most. So one example that I would like to share in the beginning is about the SHINE event, or Sharing Insights on Cancer Care, which embodies how champions from both healthcare and the community can come together to close the gaps in cancer care. So the SHINE event began with Dr. Shawnee's Daniel Sykes' vision, and she was a professor of theology, but also a pancreatic cancer patient here at Frederick MCW. And she recognized the need for greater cancer awareness and support in her community, not only for pancreatic cancer, but other types of cancer as well. So at that time, she shared this idea with Dr. Susan Tsai, who is my mentor, but also a surgical oncologist who treated Shawnee. And she also had seen firsthand how gaps in awareness of cancer may affect patient outcomes. And long story short, together they collaborated, Shawnee leading community connection through faith-based organization, and Dr. Sai providing clinical expertise and resources to make it happen. One thing is, sadly, Shawnee passed away just before the first Shine event program took place into 2022, but her legacy lives on in this particular program. So every year we continue to honor her vision by bringing medical experts, community leaders, and cancer survivors together to educate, empower, and support those affected by pancreatic cancer and beyond. So hopefully these snippets of program kind of give that preface about the champions can come from anywhere. It can come from the clinical side, but also from community side. And by merging these two roles together, we can achieve a successful intervention and implementation. So to guide our discussion today, I would like to share a bit about an article that we just published in late 2024, which called Champions to Enhance Implementation of Clinical and Community-Based Intervention in Cancer. It is a scoping review study that we did as a group, which I will share later on, and we'll provide some sort of structure on how we want to discuss Champion in today's session. So I will start with a bit of introduction, and I thank for the kind introduction. And for this work, this is something that's an output of my work with the NCI Consortium for Cancer Implementation Science, or CCIS. And CCIS was established in 2019 under the Cancer Moonshot Initiative, and its mission is to address key challenges in cancer control through collaborative implementation science. And the objective here, to foster communication among IS project across the cancer continuum. And I will share about what are the action groups are, and develop practical solution. And we have a lot of theories, methods, models, and frameworks in implementation science, and actually provide practical solution and how to operationalize it. And essentially wants to promote a collaborative project across different institutions and beyond just individual studies and such. And so hopefully this gives a bit of background on where this particular article was developed. So CCIS itself has its annual meeting. We have action groups that convene to plan and develop publicly available tools and resources. Currently there are about 6 action groups, and for this particular article today, it's part of my work in the community participation in implementation science action group. And each group has their own focus to address specific areas in cancer and implementation science. And beyond to identify gaps, to evaluate, the implementation of an intervention, one of the goals is to develop public goods out of the studies that will provide tools and resources to advance implementation agenda in cancer control. And the public goods are usually available for public in NCI webpage, CCIS webpage, to be used for a greater audience. So in particular, our group, the Community Participation in Implementation Science Action Group, goal is to advance community participation in implementation science to enhance cancer control efforts. And the focus area is to addressing insufficient or delayed community engagement, and defining positions on engagement continuum, and developing measures and competency for effective engagement. And up to this current year, we have developed a couple of public goods that can be accessed in the NCI webpage. engaging with rural communities, tips and best practices, resources for stakeholders and community engagement, and the latest one, spotlight on program champions. So let's dive into this particular study, the Champions to Enhance Implementation of Clinical and Community-Based Intervention in Cancer, a scoping review. And I will start with a bit of background. And I understand that maybe not all of us that join us today is familiar with implementation science. And more than often when we discuss implementation science, is more or less is something that we already kind of do in our daily activities, whether it's a quality improvement project or we identify a gap and we try to improve things. And implementation science, we basically just putting labels, scientific labels, and organize them into theories, models, or framework. And the main goal of implementation science is to integrate evidence-based intervention into real-world settings and facilitate the uptake of these evidence-based interventions. Because one of the seminal study shown that, from the identification of evidence-based practice, it can take up to 20 years to be implemented in clinical settings, in public health settings. So that's where the gap is, and that's where the implementation science role is to accelerate the uptake of evidence-based practice that we find in clinical study or basic studies. And because we understand an intervention is a tool and it may prove to be effective in an ideal situation, but success not only depends on just the interventions, but also on the individuals and systems that support them. And where in this continuum where implementation science is located, for those that familiar with this translational research pathways, may understand that T0 to T2 is basically where we conduct basic science studies, clinical effectiveness, and T3 and T4 is when we start to translate this finding into clinical settings and to the public health. And this is mainly where the implementation science is located. And to help implementation science, we organize a lot of theories, models, and framework that highlight the role of key individuals who facilitate adoption and sustainment. And among these frameworks which I will share, will discuss in later slides, shown that certain individuals, or what we call as champions, may emerge as contextual enablers or facilitators, which may accelerate implementation by navigating barriers and fostering buy-in. So the first one, just to show some support of the theoretical model, is from the Theoretical Domains Framework, or TDF, which emphasize social and professional role identity, aligning with how champions influence behaviors and attitudes. Just a bit of context, TDF is developed based on from the behavioral science field. So it talks a lot about how what we can do or what are factors that may influence our effort to change certain behavior. And in this case, talking about changing health behaviors. And in this particular domains, and in this particular framework, the social professional role identity, or this part, is one of the key items to influence the change of behavior or attitudes. And the next one, one of the most frequently cited framework is the SEVERE framework, or what we consider as a determinants framework, which identify factors that may influence implementation. In one of its key domains, it identifies champions as key individual facilitators who drive engagement and overcome resistance. And this is the latest framework of SEVERE. And you can see here in the individual part, they noted the role of opinion leaders / champions in driving implementation. And also in relation to severe, the latest development is the expert recommendation for implementing change, where they connect the severe findings from the key domains into a recommendation of potential actionable strategies. And one of the strategies that they list here is identify and prepare champions. I'm just going to go through this real quick, just to give a brief overview of how champions have been acknowledged across the theoretical domains. And the last one is the normalization process theories, which highlights how champions contribute to the embedding of intervention into routine practice. So we get it. So we need champions. We need to consider of having champions when we start planning for implementation or intervention. And similar to other fields, champions are integral to research in cancer care. Yet the main problem is their roles are not well studied, not well defined, not well measured. We just, use the term champions and we kind of just go with it. And why is it important? Another theory is division of innovation theory by Everett. And just to give a quick overview, and this is not to go into details, that it shows that there are 5 groups of adopters. One is a small percentage will be considered as innovators. These are who are considered as risk takers. These are the people that will be at the front line when they identify certain evidence-based practice. And the second one is the early adopters. These are usually what we call as an opinion leaders. That has experience in their field, in their setting, and can see the value of an evidence-based practice. And in this theory, there is a chasm between these early adopters and early majority. And this chasm is kind of what partly determine whether an implementation or intervention will be successful or not, is whether the early adopters able to facilitate, and incorporate or invite or take more adopters, which then constitute the early majority. And there will be a late majority and then laggards who are very resistant to innovation. So they play they play key roles across the translational research continuum, as the previous slides shown, and it as the snippet that I shared in the beginning, it can exist and facilitate implementation in both clinical and community settings. And the scoping review tried to examine how champions emerge and their key activities. And a bit of history, when we did this scoping review, we identified that the first conceptualized champion word is in 1963, as conceptualized as product champions to overcome resistance to change, and initially seen as inventors or innovators within an organization. And there are limited research on champions for decades, with renewed interest from 2007 to 2012, and recent focus on champion personal characteristics and influence in healthcare. Again, despite their widespread use, the wording and all, champions' impact on outcome is unclear, and variability in champion, how we define a champion, what is the lingo or the wording that we use to say this is a champion or not, makes standardization is difficult. And specifically for our research in cancer, we lack best practice for identifying champions. As we can see later on, champion can emerge organically, or it can something that designed by the system or assigned to a certain person. And that's why understanding champions can improve the effectiveness of cancer intervention. So I won't go too much detail into the methods part because that's not the focus of today's discussion. But I would like, and hopefully part of the result will kind of give, insights to what we did in the methods section. And I would invite the audience to see the article for more details on the methods part. So overall, out of about 1,500 or so articles about champions, 74 articles were included in this scoping review. And there are studies examine champions in various cancer care intervention. And when we map the champions into cancer control continuum, we found that champions can be found across prevention, screening, treatment, and survivorship. And most study for this particular scoping review, most studies were conducted in the United States and urban settings. And so this goes to show from our identification of champions article out of 1,100, sorry about that, we removed a couple of duplicates and we screened the studies and review their eligibility and end up with the 74 article review for this particular article. So what we found is research on champions increased significantly from 2010 to 2020. And majority of studies use descriptive or observational design. So you can see from the beginning, there's a lot of cross-sectional studies, but not many longitudinal studies, which we will get into later on, because one part of implementation outcomes that we are most interested on, but rarely studied, is about sustainability of things. And it also applies to the champion study that we rarely, even in the study, we don't really found any longitudinal studies on the impact of champions. And out of those cancer control continuum from the prevention, screening, treatment, and survivorship, we found that mostly is in the screening intervention. And then less frequently studied in prevention, treatment, and survivorship. So, so that's the context, and now I would like to share a bit about the types and roles of champions. And we found that clinical champions were most common, 61%, followed by community-based champions. And this is just show the gap that most of our studies either were done in the clinical settings. So there's not that many collaboration between the community and the academic side when we try to implement an intervention in relation to cancer care. And other types include leadership and also patient champions. So we found the types, not only the clinical, but community-based, but also leadership and patient champions. And as you can see here, most of the study describe the champions as are mostly assigned. So they will pick someone and it will be assigned as a champion. And while only 28% were volunteers. And even though it's a small number, the 28% compared to the 45%, but we found in a couple of these studies that emergent champions played key roles in organic adoption, which some studies shown that it may influence sustainability as well. And when we try to map this all 74 articles into this word mapping, and this just goes to show what are the terms used to call a champion. Obviously, champion is the biggest one. So this is basically shown, the larger the word, the more frequent they are mentioned in these articles. And you can see there are a lot of variation in how we call champion. It can be clinical champion, it can be lay health advisor, it can be opinion leader, pastor, to refer back to the faith, the importance of faith-based leader, organizational champion, nurse, volunteer, so change agent. So there are a lot of wording to say to define the term of the champion itself. And so that's one thing. That's one of the key findings of this studies is we don't have this standardized way to call a champion. And we also outline core activities of champions. And we found that the most common activities of champion is first and foremost is the facilitation, which champions guide and support the implementation of intervention by identifying gaps, solving problems, and coordinating efforts across stakeholders. So they help to navigate challenges, ensuring intervention are adopted effectively. And they also may serve a role as an outreach, to communicate benefits and also identify and engage key stakeholders to encourage intervention uptake, and that also include participant recruitment for an implementation study. And champions often also help in identifying the needs and empowered targeted population. And they also provided mentorship and support to peers in cancer care settings. And some of them engaged in study design and monitoring intervention effectiveness. And out of those 78 studies, we kind of create this table. And as you mentioned in the earlier slide, that most of the activities of these champions are mostly either on the facilitation or outreach slash promotion, which is understandable because usually those that we call champion will provide that access to certain population. And as the diffusion of innovation theory graph shown, that they can be the opinion leader, they can be the early adopter, which kind of can facilitate or also lead promotion or outreach effort. And so first, we identify the terms that we use to define champions. Then we identify core activities, and we also identify barriers from these articles. And consider, understandably, when someone serves as a champion, they already have an existing role to begin with. And that role will that primary role will take most of their time. So time constraint may limit champion engagement. And since most of them can be either be assigned or emerge organically, sometimes champions can face low self-efficacy and the lack of formal training. And since this is an organization and also intervention studies, high turnover rates can disrupt continuity in interventions. And lack of buy-in from organizational leadership can also hinder champion efforts. And in addition to the barriers, we also identify facilitators of champion success. We found that champions that really came forward with their intrinsic motivation and influence were more effective. So for the studies that assess, motivation level on certain individuals, those with high motivation will serve as a more effective champion. And providing clear role definition and in some cases financial incentive can support champion efforts. And in response to the barriers of buy-in from the leadership, organizational support, leadership engagement, and structured training can enhance impact. And having champion actually kind of help to build strong relationship with the target population to improve trust and intervention uptake, especially considering there's a lot of trust issue between the academic and the community that they're trying to serve. So having champions to facilitate building this relationship will certainly help to implement the intervention. What we so well, we understand that champion itself cannot be the only strategy when we do an implementation project. And so we try to go beyond just identifying facilitator barriers and core activities, but what other strategies that exist in these studies that kind of help to facilitate champion in achieving the implementation project goals. And certainly clear planning and having a clear education or training program will certainly help. And having a board, community, it can be a community advisory board or a clinical advisory board, and having this, groups of champions to sit together and actually evaluate implementation process, implementation evaluation, and provide different perspective can contribute to intervention success. And quality management and leverage funding can certainly sustain the program itself, because the champion can do so much. So having an infrastructure for a continuous feedback loop for quality management and availability of funding will certainly help. And for the long run, we see a couple of limited study on policy development for long-term change. And type of complementary strategy, we saw that most of these studies that we review have this either education or planning in place that helps to facilitate champion serve their role effectively. So overall, the key other additional key takeaways from this studies is we found that limited studies that directly measure champions' impact on health outcomes, and champions may create a climate for change and improve intervention reach, and it helps sustain initiatives beyond initial implementation phases. And again, most studies lack long-term follow-up on champion effectiveness. And I try to summarize this in this one slide because it will provide a good segue to our next part. So just to highlight a couple of things, again, champions are widely used across the cancer continuum. Most champions were assigned rather than emerging organically, and core activities have been outlined: facilitation, outreach, recruitment, and limited research exists on champions' direct impact on health outcomes. So out of that, we create this initial a model, not necessarily a framework, a model of how we map all of our findings that shared just now, and we tried to capture everything that we found from this review. That we need to acknowledge that there are many terms that we use to define champion, and these are the components that can facilitate or create barriers for the champions to effectively run their roles. And this is word as such, so it doesn't provide that direction, but please know that individual characteristic, whether they have inherent motivation or lack of motivation, so that can provide that direction, whether it create facilitators or barriers. And these are the core champion activities, and these are the complementary strategies that exist in our review that help to facilitate the champion impact. And we hypothesize that this contribute to improve health outcomes. So again, the champion itself, if it exists, in that individual manner, it won't function as well as expected. We need these complementary strategies to enable this champion impact and help to improve the health outcome. In this case, is the on the cancer care side. So in our discussion, we mentioned that since most champions who are assigned rather than emerge organically, so usually they are appointed based on social position. Either it's rank within their organization, rather than skills. And we mentioned skill either communication skill, outreach skills, or other things that that may serve a characteristic as an effective champion. And organization rarely activate emergent champions in structured ways. And again, one of the limitation, champions need tailored training to maximize their effectiveness. And high turnover can disrupt a champion-driven initiative. And so another thing that we discussed in this review article is the tension between those appointed and emergent champions. We acknowledge that appointed champions may provide that structure, but then again, they may lack intrinsic motivation compared to those that organically become a champion. And I think we kind of learn from our experience in many of our settings. Sometimes an influencer not necessarily be the structural leader. It can be someone that people see as experienced, or people see that they can connect with, and these are the traits that that can facilitate the emerge of organic champion. And again, this point is to highlight that emergent champions have organic influence but lack formal roles. And a combination of both may, acknowledging that both may exist, may enhance implementation success. And future research should explore best practices for champion activation. Because one of the things that can, a good research is those that kind of generate more questions. So additional question from this is, when should we activate champions? At what phase it is more effective? Is champion role is something that evolved, or is it something that's static? Is it something that becoming dynamic, or is so those questions are some interesting questions that can be focused on moving forward. And this one will help that one of our effort moving forward is to create this champion training, because there is a need for this champion training. Few studies documented a structured champion training program, especially skills in leadership, communication, and engagement are critical. And champions often conduct emotional labor to manage resistance. And there's that, tension between pushing intervention forward and actually navigating the resistance around an intervention. And training should address both technical and interpersonal aspect of champion roles. And again, we cannot highlight the importance in the importance of organizational support. Champions need leadership buy-in to sustain implementation effort. A clear incentive and recognition improve champion retention. Aligning champions with organizational goals or formalize them into the system will enhance the impact, and institutionalizing champion role may reduce dependence on individual motivation. So with all this insight, so then what? it's always the question about that we deal in implementation science. So we know all about this. We know about the gap. We know about the things that didn't work, the things that we need to address. So this is what we're trying to do in the CCIS, the NCI CCIS, is to move towards that public good side, to create this toolkit. So we're currently in the process of developing Champions Toolkit that will be publicly available after we completed this project. So from that study, there is a need for champions support, and we understand champions are crucial for implementing cancer control intervention. And one of the key gaps is lack of structured training and support. There's no standardized toolkits, so we currently designed 3 tailored toolkits for community-based settings champions, academic medical centers, and also for health organization. And we borrow from our scoping review and try to define this further. First, language of champions, create that one document that define the roles and importance of champion, organizational mapping, identifying potential champions in different settings. So if you see that model in the earlier slide, so we try to put a more detailed model and put it in its respective settings. And integration into strategies, aligning champions with implementation frameworks that already exist, providing a more clearer task definition. So what we shared with you earlier is just a snippets of things, and maybe it will be helpful for the greater audience, the public audience, to have this task more defined with examples and with case studies to provide that clear roles and responsibilities for champions, and also to help resource planning, ensuring champions have institutional support, whether they emerge organically or they are assigned by the system. And what is also important, how to evaluate the impact of champions. Because out of the review of the studies that we did, not many studies that have this metrics to assess the effectiveness of champion, and hopefully this toolkit will start initiating the development of this measure to evaluate champion effectiveness. And to disseminate this public toolkit, we're hoping not to only publish it in the NCI webpage, but also create a training and webinar and training model to train practitioners, either the key leadership or those that identify themselves as champions, and or for the implementation scientists in this room, in the audience, or those that interested in facilitating the uptake of their intervention. And hopefully it will feature interactive participatory dialogue to create that feedback loop and real world case example, and again to continuously improve on how we define and evaluate the champion's role. So again, this work won't be possible without the collaboration in this group, and Dr. Nicola is our chair at the moment. And this just goes to show that we come from everywhere, and we have our background, we have our perspectives on things, and that's what we're trying to get in this particular project: define the champion and provide a public toolkit that hopefully will be useful for the public audience. Thank you.
Are there any questions in the chat?
Does anybody on the line have any questions? Feel free to either unmute yourself or drop it in the chat.
I had a question. Alex?
I think you kind of implicitly got to this at the end, because you mentioned that you had 3 different focuses for the toolkit you were developing. But when you think about champions and their effect here, on who or what are they acting? Is it the behavior of the clinical practitioners that you're changing, the behavior of the patients, the behavior of the health system?
No, that's a great question, and that's actually one of the question in our discussion. How we're going to group this toolkit? Is it based on the the targeted population, the specific intervention, and we decided on the user perspective, and we will try to create this toolkit to be applicable for general purposes. But we understand there is that difference between the context of we in this academic setting and those at the community settings, in terms of the resources available for them, the structure that will be able to support their work. So I may not have the definitive answer to your question, but that's how we try to outline this toolkit. Is based on the user perspective, and we will let them to apply this toolkit to their context, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And one thing that hopefully will be helpful to have that case studies to show how can this toolkit can be applied to certain type of intervention or population.
Within this framework, is it just sort of axiomatic that the intervention being championed is already proven effective? And is that believed by the community to which it's being championed?
Okay, can you reiterate that question again? I'm sorry.
No. So is it axiomatic or presupposed in this framework that the intervention that is being championed is proven and believed effective?
Oh, right. So yeah, since this is okay. So from the perspective of implementation science, yeah, we take that leap of chance. That's implementation science study or project is to facilitate the uptake of evidence-based intervention. So, and that's where we focus on how we want to facilitate this uptake of intervention that's already proven to be effective. And this is where the champions will come in to facilitate that uptake, because the premise is we understand that the intervention itself that proven effective in maybe in limited settings or in certain contextual manner.
So that's the key piece of this.
Yeah. Because
you're looking in this diffusion model to move it into a much broader setting.
Correct. Yeah.
So, yeah, there's interesting questions around what the connection is between the championing process and the further gathering of evidence.
Evidence, right? So, that's really interesting, and I think at this point of our project, we're focusing on that part, that the evidence-based the intervention is already proven, quote unquote, and the champion role is to facilitate that uptake. But that's also interesting, how can champions help to gather evidence about certain intervention? I guess that's where your question.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Or to persuade those who, for whatever reason, are or are not aware of the intervention, but may not believe or may just have an intrinsic skepticism towards the cost benefit of that intervention.
Okay.
But you are on to something great there, because we often focus on that kind of axiom that we know the evidence, it's there, we just need to implement it. And that's the subway pathway of implementation science, right? Where you want to kind of prove that, this is the context, these are the facilitators, these are the barriers, these are the strategies that are successful in leading into implementation. But oftentimes the evidence either is not conclusive enough. So you may have evidence-informed interventions, but not necessarily evidence-based, clear-cut that there is a benefit. or they have been studied in certain contexts or in certain populations that you really don't know if it applies very well in other settings
Right.
or other populations. So then you go on a hybrid studies where I bet a champion would be extremely useful in a hybrid type of study too, because you have that intervention that is one, you look comparative effectiveness study, but you also have the implementation side of the study, where probably you can benefit from the attributes of a champion. So yeah, don't focus only on implementations, pure implementation interventions, but look at the hybrids ones also, and that would be also a great outreach to the quality improvement and quality management people. But all of a sudden, you bring them into the fold without thinking that they are stepping into a territory that is completely foreign to them. We can have one question.
I had a question about the bell curve that you showed earlier. Just the law of diffusion implementation. Yeah. The chasm. What are the determinants of getting past the chasm?
What
factors determine if you're going to cross that point or not?
Yeah, so so that the division of innovation theory hypothesized that the key is between this early adopter and facilitating the participant or the audience to use this intervention or adopt this intervention and become that early majority. And what kind of determine this chasm is, can be several things. First of all, the intervention itself, how much evidence we have about the intervention, whether it provide enough evidence that will cater to different type of stakeholders. Because obviously, to facilitate intervention, we need a collaboration from different stakeholders. And the second part is about we need to understand the context that we're operating for certain. I'm talking really broadly at the moment, and sometimes an organization can be really mature, that they're really comfortable with the status quo. That to move the needle, you will need a lot of convincing, a lot of, again, evidence to move past this chasm. And so maybe it's, so that's part of it, and then there is that this is either the regulation around this organization kind of facilitate this. Will we, faced with any legal, impact of adopting this intervention for our patient? And more than often, the concern is, so we are able to cross the chasm to become the early majority, but there's still that about 50% that come later on, late majority and laggards. And sometimes 50% is not enough to improve the quality of health. I'm talking, and I may be happy to discuss this further, but that's some of the key takeaways that I take about the chasm and its determinants.
I mean, Ev Rogers postulated that is the leadership intervention there, that you need change leadership and change push from leaders, champions. Yeah.
Well, we have several examples, real world examples. Research initiatives were started. We get some early adopters, but never reaches critical mass.
Yeah.
And I would go back to the basics. If you are to use Ev Rogers' model, what's the intervention? What's the evidence behind it? What's the channel of communication? Who are the stakeholders there, right? and over what period of time? And
Right.
how do you kind of customize your intervention to address all those potential barriers?
Mhm.
Questions from the
Yes, we have
chat?
one in the chat. First, there's a thank you for the wonderful review. It was much appreciated. Question is from that same person. In your reviews, did you find information about the environments that are supporting champions and or allow them to be more or less effective in their work?
So yeah, that's
I mean, you only reviewed 1,100 studies, right?
so yeah, we understand contexts are important when we try to organize all these findings, and I think the way we try to define the environment is what we say here as organizational characteristics. The organization can be defined flexibly as whether it's a community-based location or health system like ours, and the relationship which kind of provide a proxy to the external setting about relationship with the target population. So to answer the question, we don't really specify which environment, and again, so couple of things. We see a lot of studies about the use of champions in clinical settings, but not many studies on that community setting. So that's one of the gap, and we may need to do additional studies on figuring out what type of champions will be effective in different type of settings. And then the second part, that's why we try to develop the toolkit based from the user perspective. And it just we think it kind of serve as that proxy to the environment as well, because the user can come from the community environment, academic environment, or health system administrative environment. At this point, we try to acknowledge it as such, but to really say that this one is more effective in these settings, these traits will be more effective in this setting, we don't currently have answers to that. What we currently have is outlining these factors that come into play when we try to operate champions within our settings. But thank you for that question.
So let me ask you the easy question then. So when you do a scoping review, you're looking at the entire literature, you have to deal with the variability of what the term means in that particular article or investigation or presentation. And very appropriately, you looked at, what are the actual roles there? Are they these promoters? Are these facilitators? Are they experts that are becoming early adopters? Are these leaders? So I think slide 23 for you have a very nice kind of bar graph there where it shows the different roles by frequency. But that also is to nicely interpret that a champion could be somebody who's facilitating, is promoting, is co-designing the intervention, and or becoming an advertising person to the rest of the stakeholders, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you are to, going back to your good final question, so what? What should an organization do? Should they create competencies that they would start training people to become champions, freestanding champions embedded in different units? Or you would encourage emerging champions in project-based emerging champions? Or you would develop in a larger group that is trying to apply an intervention a specific framework of developing or eliciting who is naturally inclined to be a champion, and then you provide them the necessary competencies. And the example I have in my mind is team science approach. So we have our ensembles. We say, well, our problem is this. Let's identify what stakeholders do we need. Maybe we need a cardiologist, a diabetologist, a general nutritionist, a primary care physician, and a community member. Should we aim to have a larger number upfront from each one of those stakeholders so that we can select the champions? Because you don't always find in that small cohort somebody who's appropriate for championship. So I know it's a loaded type of commentary / question, but what are your thoughts about, should organizations to start developing their freestanding champions embedded in the units like they did it with Lean Six Sigma, quality management, continuous improvement, with advantages and disadvantages, or you have a very targeted approach, project-based?
So I will try. Okay. So to approach that question, I think first and foremost, so reflecting on the insight from this study is the organization itself need to acknowledge, the role of champions and and what is the value of having champions. That's the first thing, and the second thing. Okay, so you acknowledge this, and it's something that we already did for many years, that we acknowledge there are champions within our environment and so on. But the thing is, we don't provide the structure for this champion to serve its role in their most optimum ways. And I think one way is, as you already outlined, is to have this group like team-based science that identify these key leaders, or maybe the key experts or key opinion leaders, and I would start from that, and creating this list of opinion leaders or key leaders in certain key areas will be great, but doesn't necessarily that the group itself need to grow bigger. Because the thing about a larger group, it's move slower, and it's not that really effective in disseminating or pushing the agenda and so on. And so I think to circle back is first the acknowledgement, and after you do that acknowledgement, you should provide the structure. When you identify champions, then you need to be aware that you need to do this checklist. Okay, I noted that you are a champion, and I would like to ask you to serve in this role as a champion formally, and we will have this support for you. It can be incentive, it can be organization will support you, but on top of that, what can we do for you to enable you to effectively serve your role? Because that what actually that rarely happen, that hey, you are our champion, let us know if you can reach such and such, and that's that. I think a more structured and organized way we approach champion, and that's what we're trying to do, at least to create that framework. These are things that you need to consider, some sort of like a checklist that you need to consider when you identify champions, and whether to have a sign or I think both have their values. We as either key leaders can only have to an extent limited capacity in identifying the right person for the right job, and we need to acknowledge that there will be someone that can emerge from that, not necessarily serve as a key position leader. One thing that we haven't really discussed in this article is how we can weave them both. So we have an assigned role, but we also acknowledge, or maybe the assigned role can recruit someone or identify someone, because we expect that they will have a better knowledge about their context / environment. So maybe they know who is has the potential to emerge and recruit them. So yeah, that's one thing that we didn't discuss, is how to weave them to. Again, at the bottom line, it's about figuring out the individuals that we need to operate our implementation. And as always, we need key leaders, we need key opinion leaders, and this is just one way to operate that in a structured manner.
I'd be curious to see how the specific competencies for championship would be different from other competencies that we develop for translational science, for example.
Right.
I mean, it goes back to the issue of maybe that's the perfect world where you have embedded, established champions that have been trained and they know their frameworks and they help catalyze change. And when you have ad hoc groups, team science ensembles, for example, maybe the project managers being trained champions will start recruiting from the team science group local champion that will get the necessary tools to function in that setting. And the project manager will continue to be present and then provide the resources needed for the team to advance. But you're right, it goes back to if you don't have specific outcomes measures and impact measures, then it's even hard to define what are the competencies needed, right?
Yeah. And yeah, that's that's part another discussion that when we talk about measures, is it so are we going to attribute implementation outcomes to the champion who is maybe necessarily come to this project as a volunteer, and then you assign these outcomes to this champion? It doesn't, it doesn't sound right. And so you need to figure out to what extent that this champion, what you expect out of this champion and how it may impact the outcome, but not necessarily the outcome itself is the responsibility of the champions. Because then again, we have the implementation science project leaders or whatever. Right. And so you need this key person to facilitate that, but not necessarily, yes, you are responsible to make sure that this is effective. We want to see, improvement in clinical outcomes, such and such. So again, adjusting the scope of outcomes that we want to attribute to the champions is also, we don't touch that here, but that's one of another question that we need to figure out.
It's similar to the discussion about maturity of an organization, where you may apply a specific matrix of performance by domains, but your outcome measures are not the final deliverables of the team, but how structured was the process of working and improving communication, delivery, meetings, and so forth, and don't care about the final outcome of the group, right?
Yeah.
Any final comments or questions for Scott? If none, thank you so much.
Thank you.
No, thank you. This is an excellent discussion and feedback for me. Thank you.
Thank you.